It's literally one of the biggest secrets in all of Warhammer 40K, but nobody's really talking about it. But with the massive amounts of new lore that Games Workshop has promised us, we really should be, because a lot of hints are pointing at some seriously massive things coming that all share this same foundation of secrecy. So what is it that I'm talking about? The top secret project within a top secret project. The creation of the Space Marines of the Adeptus Astartes and their Primarchs was conducted in extreme secrecy. Few beyond the Emperor worked on it or even knew about it. But even within this extremely dark, compartmented project, there was another, more secretive black budget project buried, and that was the Trefoil Legions. Now this lore goes back to the early days of the Horus Heresy Black books, and appears first in the second volume, Massacre. So it's been around for quite a while, but if my gut is telling me the truth, my instincts are correct, this seed planted long ago is about to bear a lot of fruit. The Trefoil were 3 legions of the Adeptus Astartes that for whatever reason the Emperor deemed their origin and creation to be kept secret even from the other Space Marines. What he did to them, and to their gene seed, only the Emperor knows truly, and why he did what he did is also a mystery. But there are some things we do know, and some pretty deep references in the lore. The 3 legions that make up the Trefoil are quite a unique bunch and don't seem to share much in common on the surface. They are the 6th Legion, the Vulkan, or the Space Wolves, the 18th Legion, the Salamanders, and the 20th Legion, the Alpha Legion, otherwise known as the Ghost Legion. What qualities did the Emperor impart upon these legionnaires that he needed to keep it a secret from everyone? What could have been so controversial that even the Emperor's closest advisors and confidants were not privy to it? And how did this inevitably play into the Horus Heresy and the fates of both the Imperium and the Emperor of Mankind? The Alpha Legion, who isn't even technically named that, is already a secret within a secret, an obfuscation of truth to a certain degree, a smokescreen that the Emperor could use to conduct extreme, highly coordinated covert operations. The only legion of the Adeptus Astartes that would even think of infiltrating another legion, let alone being capable of pulling it off. These guys are a double cross within a double cross. The Roman numerals that represent the legion, XX, are themselves indicative of that. So we know that there is a perpetual fog of mistrust obscuring any truth that could ever be gleaned about the Alpha Legion. But what we do know about their creation is that they weren't designated by name until after they were unleashed on the galaxy. In the pre-Great Crusade days, as a proto-legion, they were simply referred to as Project Alpha. And since they weren't the first legion, that honor goes to the Dark Angels, why were they called Alpha? And again, this was a designation, not a name. And yeah, Lionel Johnson had every right to be like, what the hell? When he found out the 20th and last Legion was calling itself Alpha. And there was the double slap in the face of the Primarch's name, Alpharius, just mirroring that as well. But this Proto-Legion, when it was in its infancy, was not expanded upon like other Astartes. There weren't tens of thousands of Space Marines created, only a couple thousand, and they weren't introduced to the other legions. In fact, their Primarch may have been the first found of the 20 or 21 Primarchs, and kept entirely secret by the Emperor. For by Alpharius' own account, which I must admit is dubious at best, he was raised by the Emperor himself, and the 20th Primarch was found on Terra. Only Malkador knew the truth, and Alpharius hid from his Primarch brothers right under their noses. In fact, it is thought that he was even present when the Emperor first came to Chemos and met Fulgrim. Alpharius was wearing the armor of if I remember correctly, one of the 3rd Legion's Marines. So they are special use, small batch, and extremely effective, secretive, and capable. The Alpha Legion is an extreme case of being a specialized tool that the Emperor can pull out to use when he needs it and put it back away without anyone ever even knowing. It makes sense that the Alpha Legion was created in absolute secrecy, completely controlled by the Emperor and none others allowed to work on the project. But these specialist traits are not what makes the Trefoil special, as the other 2 legions do not share these traits. When we look at the Space Wolves and Leman Russ, we see the Emperor's most loyal servants, the ones he trusted to hunt down and deliver his justice even to their own cousins. the legion made to put other legions in check, and the Primarch who was made to slay other Primarchs, should they ever need it. They aren't the masters of subterfuge that the Alpha Legion is, and they don't share much in common culturally with the rest of the Imperium or even the other legions of the Adeptus Astartes. The Space Wolves have their own weird Viking thing going on with some Slavic influence. Vikings mixing with Slavs. Where have I heard of this before? Yeah, Russ's name isn't so subtle. They might as well have made his first name Rurik. But it wasn't some big secret that the Space Wolves were the Emperor's executioners. This was mentioned many times, and it was a given. The legions understood that if they stepped out of line, then the Emperor would sick his Space Wolves on them. So what was it about them that made it so that they had to be included in the Trefoil? And that brings us to the other Trefoil Legion, the Salamanders. And they were extremely brutal and prideful. The Salamanders just wouldn't retreat. They wouldn't fight with less efficiency just because they were getting bodied. And before they reunited with Vulkan, their Primarch, they lost 19,000 out of 20,000 of their guys, just refusing to back down. It earned them a solid reputation as a legion not to mess with, but the Salamanders were almost completely destroyed. After Vulkan was found, and he took control of his legion, his sons changed dramatically as he was able to exert a high level of influence over the culture of his legion and directly intervene when they were acting in ways that weren't in accordance with how he was running things. But it is Vulkan who is the most obvious of the three Trefoil Primarchs as far as what it is about him that the Emperor did during his creation that would warrant such secrecy. Vulkan is a perpetual, and there are a lot of fan theories out there as to what the secret of secrets of the Trefoil are, and they range over quite a lot of wild ideas. But I have one of my own, and I've had it for many, many years. So I thought it was about time to share it, as there are more and more hints all the time that I might just be right in my crazy thinking. But how do we know that Vulkan is a perpetual? He died many times over. He keeps coming back. Vulkan is absolutely, undisputedly a perpetual. There's no doubt about that. And that is an aspect of the Emperor that he only distilled and infused into this one son. Or so the community has believed and has been the dominant narrative for decades. But what if that simply weren't true? Sure, Primarchs have died, and we know they didn't possess the same power as Vulkan. But we haven't exactly seen the end of Leman Russ or Alpharius. Don't worry, we'll get to that. So we don't know for sure yet, but we can put two and two together. Vulkan was created in absolute secrecy, and his legion was created by using his super secret gene seed worked on by the Emperor alone, allegedly. And Vulkan possesses an insane ability that his other brothers do not seem to have. But what if Alpharius and Leman Russ are also perpetuals? What if that power that Vulkan has is what the Emperor did to his gene seed during his creation, and he had to work on the Salamanders Legion alone so that no one else would know the truth? It would be a very big deal for the Imperium at large, or even the Proto-Legions, to know that one of the Primarchs could not be killed. It seems that Vulkan's perpetuality was a deliberate and intentional product. The Emperor figured out how to impart his own immortal nature onto his son, the most powerful aspect of himself, copy-pasted onto his most powerful son. Well, many believe that title belongs to Vulkan. I'm not so sure myself. Perhaps Magnus was physically stronger, but Vulkan is certainly a powerhouse. Now we have a perpetual who cannot die, even if he is lost in the setting now and awaiting a return to physical reality, and he is part of a super secretive project that affects his legion's gene seed, and also has two brothers and their legions are also part of this project. The stage is set. So with Alpharius, there is actually some evidence that he is also a perpetual, just in his own way. There are multiple instances of the death of the Primarch being reported, from his death at the hands of Rogel Dorn at the Battle of Pluto, to his reported death by Guilliman's blade at the Battle of Escrador. There are many accounts of this Primarch's demise, and yet he seems to raise his head again and again, even appearing recently in the book Pariah. and performing some extreme feats of strength, dexterity, speed, and skill that not even the most capable Space Marines could pull off, and all without power armor on. And sorry guys, those Guilliman fans who really do believe that he killed Alpharius on Escrador need to watch my video on Guilliman versus Alpharius, which explains that old lore, and I even read that battle to you from the source, which was literally just a White Dwarf magazine from 2003. So what I am saying is that most of what we know about Alpharius has been deliberately obfuscated by Games Workshop for decades. Even the accounts of his death in the lore are shrouded in mistrust and deceit. So if he is reported to have died multiple times and yet keeps popping up, and no, I'm not talking about just some psycho-conditioned legionnaire using the name and cosplaying as his father. I'm talking about the actual Primarch, or Primarchs. And this is where it gets complicated and revelatory. The elephant in the room, which is Omegon. Now, Omegon is also a complicated figure. I can even say that my first video on this channel was about how Omegan, sorry, I've been corrected by British people, and Americans say Omega different than you guys who say Omega, but anyway. My first video on this channel was about Omegon actually not even existing. That Alpharius is Tyler Durden, basically. So there are a lot of theories about him, and many people who believe that he is a manifestation of dissociative identity disorder. But I think when we are talking about the Trefoil, we need to look at the book Legion by Dan Abnett, the 7th book in the Horus Heresy series of novels, and one of the best books in the entire series. And at the very end of this great story, we get a conversation between Alpharius and Omegon and the Xenos secret society known as the Cabal. Now, the great strands of fate that the Farseer of the Cabal showed the Primarchs is not of much consequence to this particular video in theory, but it is right before those revelations that the Cabal demanded to speak not just with the Primarch, but with the entire Primarch. Omegon was trying to hide among the Legionnaires, but the Cabal's insectoid spokesman, Galatro, called him out. He stated that the entire Primarch was now spread across 2 bodies, and stated that it was 1 soul, 2 bodies. But he did suggest that Alpharius did not start that way. And this is where Galatro uttered one of the most interesting lines in all of Warhammer 40K. He was speaking to the Primarchs, who were shocked the Cabal knew that there were 2 of them, and Alpharius and Omegon state it is indeed their legion's greatest and most heavily guarded secret. Galatro actually understands it better than the Primarchs themselves seem to. And he makes a comment about the nature of the Hydra. He says, "Cut off 1 head, 2 more shall take its place," which is exactly what happens in mythology when Heracles fights the Hydra. Every time he severs 1 of its heads, 2 more grow back from the wound. Galatro's remark cannot be disregarded offhand. He knows Alpharius was once 1 body, and that he was somehow ended and came back as 2. And this to me suggests that Alpharius is in his own way a perpetual. So we can infer that he was probably killed for the first time when the Primarchs were scattered, thus creating Omegon. And there's a lot of weight behind the argument that Durden did indeed kill Alpharius at Pluto. As much as I don't want to believe it, I'm like the anti-Valrock. Did he split into 2 more again? That would certainly give the Hydra 3 heads now. And it would explain a lot in the lore. And it would explain why Alpharius is part of the Trefoil. Because just as Galatro suggested, Alpharius shares the nature of perpetuality with Vulkan. And while Vulkan slowly goes crazy from being killed over and over again, Alpharius is at least somewhat insulated from this phenomenon by the fact that his consciousness is splitting. Each half of his new whole is instilled with part of the horror and trauma of the last death, and they can share the burden between them. Where Vulkan has to deal with it all himself, the twin Primarchs can carry that load as a team. But the Alpha Legion itself has many clues and hints as to this sort of flavor of perpetuality. From the Legionnaires themselves all being psycho-conditioned to have Alpharius' consciousness overlaid onto their own when and if it is needed, to the Ghost Legion beneath the Imperial Palace waiting to be activated, it's a unique situation for any of the legions. Almost as if whatever it was the Emperor was working on was finally actually perfected. Leman Russ and the Space Wolves are no less interesting when looked at through the lens of their membership in the exclusive Trefoil Club. Russ was the Emperor's executioner, we know that much about him. But Russ is also the Viking, Thor/Odin figure in the setting, and resurrection is a common theme with those figures. And the more time goes on, the more the lore is leaning into this vibe for the Wolf King. And what do the Space Wolves call the Emperor? The Allfather, just like the Norse called Odin. So Leman Russ didn't die in the setting, but he did get wounded with a terrible injury from which he couldn't recover, and he told his sons that he was going off into the warp to die. But that despite whatever laws of life and death exist, he would return to them in the wolf time for the final battle. And we know that Russ went to seek the Tree of Life, just like Odin did. And in 40k lore, the Tree of Life, Yggdrasil, is thought to be able to restore his physical form, and perhaps also that of the Emperor. We have a Primarch who, instead of dying in the traditional sense, went into the warp to connect with the force which will restore his form. A source of occult knowledge and life energy, supposedly, and beyond anything that he could connect with in real space. Russ didn't surrender the flesh and cease to be. Leman Russ chased his own legendary resurrection. He knows of a means to his own perpetuality, though he must seemingly go through a more arduous process than Vulkan or Alpharius. And being the second Primarch found after Horus, according to official accounts but not according to Alpharius, Russ was early among the Primarchs to reunite with his legion. And practically everything about the Primarchs is metaphor, and literal at the same time. So his barbaric nature and how he was absolutely unrefined compared to Horus gives us a look at how his legion would be as one of the Trefoil Legions, unrefined. It is almost as if the Emperor started with the Space Wolves gene seed and created Russ as a perpetual, but he didn't have it quite right, as Russ would still have to work for it. Then he got to Vulkan and nailed the perpetuality part with the Primarch, but the Salamanders Legion, he was unable to pass that trait too. But finally he gets to Alpha Legion and Alpharius, who he achieved a very interesting result with. It appears that the Emperor of Mankind was indeed creating an army of perpetual super soldiers, an army to hold the Imperium, police it, protect it, and spy on it from within, of all unkillable Marines. Eventually, it became a problem with the Alpha Legion, basically becoming a legion of Marines ready to upgrade to Primarchs at any time. Think about how they drink Alpharius' blood to gain his powers, and they got all that undifferentiated gene seed from the Raven Guard. They got access to Primarch material too, almost as if the Legion itself is preparing bodies to receive the consciousness of Alpharius. So I think this super dark, black operations project of the Emperor's produced a result different and possibly more powerful than he intended it to be by the time he got to the Alpha Legion. He got it right with Vulkan, but wasn't quite able to pass those traits to the Salamanders as well. He got close with Russ, but not where he wanted to get. But with Alpharius, he bit off more than he could chew. Now we know Games Workshop loves to use symbology, both literally and metaphorically, and the symbol of the trefoil is one that goes back to antiquity. In modern times, or more modern times, it has been used to represent the Trinity and is a symbol of resurrection. 3 Primarchs who can resurrect themselves through various means. 3 Primarchs who were quite different from all their brothers, standing out even amongst a group of extremely unique individuals. 3 of the most intense characters in Warhammer 40k, all bound together, their fates intertwined like the interlaced knot of the trefoil. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this now. It is going to take all 3 of these immortal beings, each imbued with an aspect of the Emperor's perpetuality, to bring back the Master of Mankind. I, for one, see that this is all interwoven with the King in Yellow plotline, and the inevitable return of Alpharius and Russ to the tabletop. There are hints of Vulkan too, but the Russ model's already been seen by some people, supposedly, and the Pale Spear was recently revealed on the Warhammer community site. Something big is afoot. There's more to the Trefoil Legions and their Primarchs than Games Workshop want us to know at this point, because it ties into this new overarching narrative they're laying the foundation for that weaves the lore and the game together in ways we've never seen, and delivers some amazing books and models in the process. I've been pondering this for a long, long time, but when it comes to this, I do believe I am right. though I'm more than happy to be wrong about it. The clues are all there. Alpharius and Russ share more in common with Vulkan than has yet been 100% confirmed, even if it has been revealed. But hey, if I was a Games Workshop writer at Black Library, I would want to write about the Ghost Legion being activated, implanted with Primarch juice, and returning as a loyalist super faction with a legion of Primarch-level perpetual fighters. Basically super custodies. The returns of Russ and Vulkan would also be amazing topics to cover in official lore, for anyone, so it's no wonder that these three share this bond. Now, if I'm wrong and the Trefoil has nothing to do with perpetuals, then I will be more than glad to admit I was off the mark. But the clues have been slowly accumulating for 20 years. These three Primarchs, well, they're something special, and they're going to shake up the lore like nothing else we've seen yet. And I, for one, would not be surprised if it literally involved the return of not only the Trefoil Legions Primarchs, but the Emperor of Mankind resurrected himself. I know this one was quite a hot take, and it might take a bit to wrap your head around. But as always, just let me know what you think in the comments. Should I stop digging up old plot lines in 20-year-old books that are resurfacing in the lore, or dive in deeper?